These are the biggest fails that I've seen by attorneys, experts, and even myself in the courtroom. I'm Jim Gordon at Beers and Gordon. Let me talk about some of the fails I've seen. The very first trial I ever had, I'm a young attorney going to trial for the very first time, and you do what's called voir dire, which is when you ask the jury questions. And the other attorney, the plaintiff attorney, I was a defense attorney at the time working for an insurance company, starts asking about the accident and about what would happen in a really bad accident, because ours was a bad accident. And one of the guys says, yes, I was in a rollover accident, and yeah, it was a really bad accident. And the next question out of the attorney's mouth was, and you survived that accident? Which we all kind of looked and said, did he just ask that question to this guy? And the guy kind of rolled his eyes like, of course I survived. So I'm a young attorney. It actually was kind of nice because it put me at ease knowing that this guy who was 20 years my senior had made a mistake like that. One of the times I remember making a big mistake was when I was a young attorney as well, and it was a small claims case. And the judge in the small claims case actually hears the case. And in this case, the judge started badgering my witness, was just all over my witness in this case because she didn't like him for various reasons. And she actually should have recused herself. She decided not to recuse herself at the start of the trial, which was very odd based on the circumstances. But in small claims, there's no reason to appeal that. But in any event, she's badgering my witness and badgering my client, and I objected as I would have to any other person with the kind of questions she was asking, thinking it was an attorney, and the judge looked at me and said, are you really objecting to me, the judge? And I just wasn't, I was young and I knew it was the right objection, but it was just not the right time to make an objection when the judge was talking. Another big attorney fail that I saw was in a trial with him, which involved drug use in the trial. And it was what's called post-mortem blood, which means after the person passed away. And this attorney thought he had a great question for my expert. In this case, this attorney says, I got a great question for the expert. I'm gonna nail her, because he heard us talking in the hall. She was going on a trip the next day. And he said, if this was in a system, and this was in a system, and this was in a system with the pilot on the plane tomorrow, would you get into that plane? Would you get on and fly that plane? And my expert paused, and we made an objection of relevance. We went up and had what's called a sidebar. And I think it gave my expert some time to think. And then he gets back up and he dramatically asks the question again. The judge allows the question. And the expert says, no, I would not get on that plane. And, well, why not? He thinks he's gonna get this great thing for himself. And he goes, well, because the pilot would be dead. So all the jurors started laughing. Everyone in the courtroom started laughing. He actually did a very poor job afterwards, and not just, I made a mistake. I meant ante-mortem blood before he passed away if it was in the system. But he just ended his cross-examination of the expert on that, which was very helpful. One of the big fails I've seen by an expert, there's a very famous expert, mostly defense expert, that just talks and talks and talks and talks, and he thinks he runs the courtroom. And in one of my trials a few years ago actually, at one point, the attorney had this way of talking, the defense attorney, where he'd say, is this a good time for this topic? Is this a good time for this topic? It happened to be noontime. And the expert turned when he says, this is a good time to switch to this topic. The expert turned, the judge is to his right, the jury's to his left. Expert turns and goes, I think it's a good time for lunch, don't you? Which the judge basically exploded. The judge controls the courtroom, not me, not the other attorney, not the expert. The judge had every right to explode. It was very inappropriate. And then apparently as we were walking up, she kicked the jury out as we were walking up, he made another comment that I didn't hear, but actually some of the other attorneys in the courtroom heard. So as you can imagine, this is an expert that testifies probably 3 or 4 days a week. He is the most highly compensated expert, I think, in the state of Florida, and testifies more than anyone else. He knew better than to do what he did, but he decided, I'm gonna take control of the courtroom, I'm gonna try to curry favor with the jury, and it did not go well for him that day. It did not go well for him later that day. He actually got an admonishment by the court on something else. Those are the biggest fails I've seen. Like I said, myself, other attorneys, and even experts make fail. It's what happens in trial. They're very dynamic times.